Hello, I'm Steve Grizzetti, co-founder of MoviePix.com and author of the MoviePix Guide to Sony Movie Studio Platinum, as well as the MoviePix.com Guide to DVD Architect Studio. And here we are in Movie Studio Platinum. Now we have created a project, we have gathered our media, we've prepared our media, and now it's time to start actually making our movie. Right now I am in the Simple Editing Workspace. And you can see that the Simple Editing Workspace is greatly simplified, as you might expect. It has only 4 tracks by default. Now you can add up to 20 tracks of audio and 20 tracks of video just as you can in advanced mode, but simple mode is made basically for throwing together a movie. I don't mean that to sound pejorative. I just mean it's made for quickly assembling a movie. Now you have a music track and an audio track and a video track and a text track. You can put video on the text track, you can add additional video tracks, but basically the program is set up, or in simple mode, the basic idea is that you're just going to quickly pull together a single track of video. And you would do that simply by dragging your video here down to your timeline. Just drag a couple pieces here, one after another. And then we would add our music right along the bottom here and then continue to build our movie out based on that. Now, how things perform on the timeline has a lot to do with how your auto ripple is set up. I'm going to cover that in just a moment. We'll talk just a little bit more about it once we get over into advanced mode. But I just want to show you simple mode and show you what some of the limitations are. You see that in simple mode, we don't have the option to create media bins. We don't have a trimmer. We have a limited set of transitions, a limited set of video effects, and a limited set of media generators, which you can use to create your titles. Once we get out here into advanced mode, though, you're going to see a much larger set of options to work with. So let's switch over to advanced mode. I feel much more comfortable in advanced mode. And you can see that technically the timeline is not that different, but you'll notice that you have a couple more controls here on the timeline. Take a look here over at simple mode. We'll just jump back here for a second. And you see your timeline, you can add effects to it, and you can mute and solo the track, but you can't parent the track, you can't do a composite track. Jump back over here. You can see we can do many more advanced things, and we can even create track motion here in advanced mode, and that's something we can't do in simple mode. So again, simple mode, very simple. Put together your movie and get it out there. Put it on YouTube or Facebook. Advanced mode, much deeper, and you can switch back and forth as you're working on a project. If you feel more comfortable pulling some parts of the movie together in simple mode, you can, and then you can switch back over to advanced mode to take advantage of some of the more advanced features. Now we've got a couple of clips added to the timeline, and we can do some very basic things right here on the timeline. Now I'm going to use the roller on my mouse to zoom in and out. You can also use the up and down keys, or you can use these little buttons here on the right and left. I much prefer working on the keyboard and with my mouse. I love that you can just roll the mouse in and zoom in to where your playhead is. And the most basic thing you can do to events on your timeline, and that's what a clip becomes once you add it to your timeline. It becomes an event, a little different than your original media clip. And once you've added an event to your timeline, you can of course trim it, which means removing from the beginning or end. And I can do that. You can see as I hover over the beginning or end of the clip, I get this option to trim it. I can just drag inward here and I can trim off a piece of it. Now you notice that all the clips slid in to fill the gap. I'm going to explain to you why that happened in just a moment. It's one of the more complicated things about the program. And I can of course stretch it the other way to make it a little longer. I can also slice my clip, which means removing from the center or cutting it right down the middle. And to do that, I position my playhead where I'd like the slice to occur, and I go down here to the buttons at the bottom of the timeline, and I click on split, and that slices my clip into 2 clips. I'm going to Control Z to undo that. But by far the most complicated thing you're going to have to deal with when you're working on your timeline has to do with auto rippling. Now, auto rippling, think of ripples in a pond. One little thing affects all the rest. And auto rippling basically means that when you move or remove one clip, it affects everything to the right of it. In other words, I have auto rippling turned on now. I can do that under the configure. There it is, auto ripple. It is turned on. There are also settings for auto ripple, and I can see them by going under options, ripple. And you see that I have affected tracks, markers, and regions, or all tracks, markers, and regions. I'll explain those in just a moment here too. And again, this is pretty complicated. If anything drives you crazy about the program until you get it under control, it's going to be auto ripple. If I were to select a clip here from my timeline with auto ripple turned on and all of my tracks affected, when I click delete, you see that everything slides to the left to fill in the gap. Control Z. If I turn off auto ripple and select a clip and delete it, nothing moves. We'll Control Z to put that back in there. But what happens if I change the configuration for auto ripple? Go under Options, select Ripple, and I'll say this time, turn on auto ripple, but I also want to set my ripple to only the affected tracks. In other words, only the track where the clip appears. Now watch what happens when I select it and delete it. Notice that all the clips on that particular track slid to the left. Those events slid to the left to fill in the gap, but the audio clip here on the lower track did not move. Now auto ripple works two ways. It works with adding clips and removing clips. I'm going to reset auto ripple here to all affected tracks. If I were to add an event to my timeline, say by dragging this clip to the very beginning of my timeline, when I let go, with auto ripple turned on, everything shifts off to the right. But what happens if I try to add a clip or add an event to my timeline when I have auto ripple turned off? Well, let's add that event. We'll drag this down to my timeline and look at what happens. It just overlays. It just drops in on top of what's already there. And in this particular case, because auto crossfades is configured, it automatically created a crossfade between those two clips. Kind of a bizarre thing and not really what I wanted. Control Z to get rid of that. In most cases, you're going to work with auto ripple turned on. In most cases. And in most cases, you're going to want it set to all tracks, markers, and regions. Where it will drive you crazy is when you have it turned on and say, for instance, I grab this music track and try to move it. Look, everything is moving with it. These are not grouped together. This is going to drive you a little bit crazy, folks. Just know that you're not alone. You know, even though I've been using this program here for well over 4 years, I will often find myself doing something like moving this track and saying, what is going on? And having to take a second. And I have to ask myself, what's going on? Why is this happening? And I go, oh yeah, it's auto ripple. So if something starts to drive you crazy, go to auto ripple first. Most likely it's whether or not you have auto ripple turned on. And if it is on, turn it off and then see if now you can do what you want to do. Move this track or delete this track. Auto ripple, a little bit complicated, but it is something you're going to want to turn on and off as you work. Now in part 5, when we come back, we're going to add some special effects to our movie. And we'll look at how that changes our movie and how we can customize those effects. We'll take a look at that then in part 5. I'm Steve Grizzetti. Thanks for joining me. We'll see you again real soon.